There are many people who think or even dream about having their own island somewhere. Most of these dreams seem to center on the warm waters of the Caribbean or South Pacific. Gananoque is a small city on the St. Lawrence River in Ontario, Canada. It is located in the so-called Thousand Islands region. Many people, both Canadian and American, live on these livable islands in the region. Not that some of these islands don't compare to islands in the Caribbean or South Pacific, because some of them have real castles. Dollar for dollar, the Thousand Islands rival any other islands in the world. They're just on the St. Lawrence River and not in the tropics. The most popular Thousand Islands story involves the salad dressing of the same name. It looks like the condiment was invented by a local housewife. It was later given as a gift to the owner of a famous New York hotel, who included it on the hotel menu around 1890. However, there is no written evidence of the veracity of this story. I drove a truck for a living. We have shipped to 48 contiguous states and Canada. I worked as a driver for a medium-sized company with about 100 trucks. All drivers had a choice of long-haul, regional, or local transport. Whenever any of us went on a long trip of a week or longer, we had the choice of staying local for a week to spend time with our families or returning for longer trips. We were also able to take our wives along on the road from time to time. Most trucking companies that cover the entire country and Canada keep their drivers on the road for weeks at a time. There are several professions that are hard on families. Military is probably the worst, followed by shipping and law enforcement. I worked in construction during the summers while in high school, so it was a logical step for me to start working full-time after high school. By the time I was 23, I was a pretty decent carpenter. When I was 19, I met an office clerk at a commercial bakery. Her name was Julie Simpson. My name is Scott Mann. Julie and I got married when we were 21. We were both happy until the banking system and therefore the construction industry suffered serious losses. Julie and I talked and decided I should try driving a truck. They earned decent money, but the biggest disadvantage was the time they had to spend away from home. The company I worked for as a driver announced that they would pay for my truck driving school if I worked for them for a year after getting my license. Julie and I discussed it and decided we would go for it. They accepted me and I went to school. 3 weeks later, I had a Class A CDL. The next week, I was put in a truck with a driving instructor. He was an experienced driver who took guys like me out on the road to really teach us how to drive. It's one thing to drive a truck pulling an empty trailer, but it's quite another when you hitch that truck to a loaded trailer that weighs between 16 and 36 tons. I was scheduled to spend 5 weeks with my instructor, but he convinced the safety department that I was good enough to have my own truck in 4 weeks. I drove around the city for a week, then drove on local roads for a week. Everything worked fine. I arranged for Julie to come into the office on Friday and collect my paycheck. This worked pretty well too. We could have received our checks directly, but Julie liked to receive them herself. I had been with the company for about 9 months and was just finishing up a week of local driving. My dispatcher, Shirley, called me and offered me a pretty good deal. We had cargo heading to Vancouver, Canada, and a return flight to Montreal. Only it wasn't actually in Montreal. It was in Gananoque. The owner of the company recently bought one of the Thousand Islands. He was incredibly young for the owner of a transport company. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 years older than me. Shirley told me that there were 2 houses on the island, the main house and the guest house. The owner and his wife wanted to furnish the main house with handcrafted furniture from Vancouver Island. The guest house was furnished. My job, if I wanted it, was to haul the load to Vancouver and then haul the boss's furniture back. It wasn't expected to be ready for another month, but it would be ready when I arrived. So the company's operations department decided to surprise the boss and deliver it early. Now this is the agreement. You can't tell anyone, even to his wife. I'm not saying she'll say anything, but she's coming for your paycheck and might say something to the wrong person. The boss and his wife will be there next weekend. This should be around the time you get there. You get to Vancouver and they load you up so you can come back. Does this sound like something you might be interested in? Before I could answer, she interrupted. Remember, whether you accept it or not, you can't tell anyone anything. Do you promise? I will accept this and promise not to tell anyone. Fine. Now, because you took it, and because I like you, Have you seen that brand new Peterbilt sitting in the yard? Of course I saw it. Well, it's yours. Put your things in it. The cargo you are carrying is in trailer 2353. You can leave in the morning. Call me when you get to Vancouver and be careful. I went home and told Julie I had a trip to the West Coast. She didn't mind because the money was good, but we both didn't like the fact that I would be gone for almost 2 weeks. To make amends, we tried our best that night. Sex with Julie had always been something special. She was ready for anything. Right after I started driving the truck, we took some nude pictures of her so I could take her with me in the truck. I've been to Canada with my truck 4 times. Each time the truck was searched. And I mean searched. The only place they didn't search was the bag hanging from my seat. When I crossed the border for the first time, there were photographs of her in this bag. After that, I left the photos at home when I found out I was going to Canada. The other times I drove, they never grabbed the bag or any other part of my truck, including under the sleeper mattress. I left the photos at home on that trip. It was easy to leave. Crossing the border went as usual. Canadian officials, as always, were courteous but absolutely thorough during the search. I called Shirley. She told me the boss's furniture was ready to ship. They had brought her from the island earlier that day in preparation for my arrival. When I got to my client, it only took him an hour to unload me, and another hour to get to the place where I was going to be loaded. Loading the trailer took well over an hour because they loaded each piece individually, then boxed and secured it. My truck was fully loaded when I headed back east. I returned to the States and headed east on Interstate 90. I returned from Canada to Detroit. The trip from Detroit to Montreal took about 9 hours. I drove to Kingston, parked for the night, and called Shirley. She told me that the boss was on the island and she had a barge ready. I was supposed to go to the commercial loading dock as soon as I could get there in the morning, and they would unload the trailer and transport the furniture to the island. I was there at 6, and loading onto the barge took until almost 10. It took about 45 minutes to reach the island. It was a straight path, but the barge was moving slowly. I went to the guest house to surprise the boss. The island was covered with trees. I only knew the way to the apartment complex from the path. What I assumed was a guest house had a small courtyard attached to it. The main house was not too far from the guest house. He looked huge. I saw the boss in the courtyard of the guest house. I walked over, and he was rubbing something into the naked breasts of a woman who was lying on a chaise lounge. I assumed it was the sunscreen he was putting on, and I also assumed the woman was his wife. As I got closer, I could see that it might have been sunscreen, but it wasn't his wife. It was mine. She was naked. I watched as one of his hands moved lower from her breast and seemed to disappear. I walked up to them and cleared my throat. They both jumped and turned to me. It took them a second or two to realize they were caught. He didn't recognize me because he had never met me before, but she did. I looked at him. I brought your new furniture from the pier. Then he turned to my wife. You might want to think about putting on some clothes before I get here. I turned and headed back to the dock. I didn't hear a single word from any of them. I walked past the men who were lifting the first piece of furniture. I made it to the dock before I remembered I was on a fucking island. I looked around and saw 4 moored boats. We had heard that there were several boats on the island, so I assumed they all belonged to him. I've never driven a boat, but that was about to change. I've watched enough TV and movies to know that boats have throttles. Push, and you will go forward. Pull, and the boat will go in reverse. I also knew that the boats don't have a brake pedal, but I'll figure that out later. I looked into the smallest boat, but there was no key in the ignition. There was a board on the wall with what looked like boat keys, with rubber balls attached, so they wouldn't drown if they fell into the water. I grabbed all the keys and jumped into the boat. The key that worked was the second one I tried. I threw the rest into the river, with or without rubber balls. The engine started immediately, but the boat was still tied down. I jumped out, untied the front and back, jumped back into the boat, and hit the gas again. The boat turned in reverse and moved away from the pier quite quickly. As soon as I pulled away from the dock, I slammed the gas forward and was thrown back into my seat. The ride back to town only took about 15 minutes. I approached the city pier too quickly and, hitting the pier, damaged the boat. The engine was still running when I jumped out. The boat got a lot of attention as I climbed into the truck, gathered my things, got out, and headed into town. I looked back and saw the boat, idling down the river with no one in it. The taxi took me to the city of Kingston and its airport quite quickly. The first plane took off in less than an hour, bound for New York. I bought a ticket. My phone rang and I looked to see it was Julie. She left one message. "Please call me back." I called Shirley. "Good morning, Scott. Did you succeed?" "How long, Shirley?" "How long for what? How long did he sleep with my wife?" "What are you talking about?" "My God. Is she there?" "She is all right." "How long?" "About 3 months. Sorry, Scott. His wife had to be there. Otherwise, I would never have sent you. So you would send me somewhere, knowing that the boss was having sex with my wife. Who else knows, Shirley? There are only 2 of us, Joey and me." "Thank you, Shirley. Thank you very much." "Wait, where are you? What are you going to do?" "Wait, he's on the other line. I'll be right back." "Fuck you." Now I understand why she didn't want me to tell Julie about the trip. She would have told Bradley, and there wouldn't have been any surprise, especially the one he just had. It was a small airport, and I could see everything and everyone coming in and out. I kept looking to see if she or he would show up, but they didn't. The flight didn't take long at all. We have landed. I rented a car and drove 4 hours home. She wasn't there. I couldn't stop thinking about what I was going to do the whole way home. My phone rang again, and she left another message. "Scott, if you're home, I'm on my way. Please don't do anything until I arrive and we can talk. We've never had sex, Scott. We just played a little. Please believe me." Have they never had sex? Jesus Christ. She honestly couldn't think I was stupid enough to believe it. Could she? At our apartment, I loaded my pickup truck with everything I wanted, walked over to the terminal, and calmly got to work. Shirley and Joey were there. After they saw that it was me, not one of them looked at me. "How much money do you owe me, Shirley?" "Scott, Write me a check for everything the company owes me, now." "Sorry, Scott. Mr. Bradley said not to give you anything until he talks to you." "Shirley, you owe me." "Thank you very much. He said you crashed one of his boats." "What else did he say? Was he bragging about entertaining my wife behind my back? Did you 4 have a good laugh at my expense? Julie came here and told you to keep me off the road as long as possible? Write me a check, Shirley, and I won't destroy this whole damn office." It only took her a couple of minutes to figure out how much I was owed. She called the accounting department and told them to write me a check. I left and went to the accounting department. They had everything ready for me. I looked at it. I changed my mind. "Transfer to my card, please." "But Scott, deposit directly, now please." I gave them my card number, and they did it. Bradley would not be able to stop the direct deposit payment. Then I went to Bradley's house. One day we were there on a picnic. My wife was probably there for more than just picnics. Mrs. Bradley opened the door. She looked and acted like she was sick. "What can I do for you?" she asked. "My name is Scott Mann, and I used to drive your husband's truck. This morning, I delivered a load of furniture to your island and found your husband massaging my wife's bare breasts with one hand while the other wandered somewhere below the waist. I just thought you might like to know. Have a good day." "Wait a minute, mister. What did you say your name was?" "Mann. Scott Mann." "What is your wife's name?" "Julie Mann." "Did you see this morning?" "With my own eyes." "Are you sure?" "Lord, lady, of course I'm sure. Do you really think that I would invent something like that about my own wife?" I walked to my truck and drove off, not having any idea where I was going, so I headed to my parents'. It didn't take me long to get them up to speed. Mom always had coffee ready, and she offered me a cup. I took it. Soon I was stretched out on the sofa. I closed my eyes. The next thing I remember, I heard my father's voice. "Julie, get off my porch, or I'll call the police. But I need to talk to Scott." "After what you did to him?" Dad asked. "In no case." "But he doesn't understand." "Oh, I think he understands everything too well. You slept with his boss for 3 months. What's so difficult about this?" but he doesn't know why. Of course he knows. You're a traitor, that's why. Now get off my porch. She started screaming my name. Scott, talk to me, please. Scott, give me a chance to explain, Scott. Scott? It was a long day, and soon I fell asleep again. The next morning I woke up early and walked to my truck. I had no idea where I was going, but I had to go somewhere. I opened the door to sit down, and Julie was sleeping across the seat. She sat up when she heard the door open. I started to walk away, but she grabbed my hand and pulled me back. Please, Scott, listen to me. I had no choice. Don't bullshit me. You either let someone have sex with you or you don't. Right, Julie? Everything was wrong. So you had sex voluntarily. It was a statement, not a question. Scott, just give me a chance. I repeat, you had sex voluntarily. Okay, I had sex voluntarily, but besides, you lied. We never had sex. We just played around a little. God, did you really expect me to believe that? Get out of my truck. She didn't budge, so I took her hand and pulled her outside. I was furious and drove off before she could get her ass off the ground. I went to a fast food restaurant in town for breakfast. I ordered one of their breakfast items and went to take a leak while I waited. I took the food to the table, sat down, and ate. When I was done, I went to the bank and split our money. My phone rang several times and several people left messages. My former employer, Ernest T. Bradley, left too. Call me and let's talk, or I'll sue you for crashing my boat, and then you'll go to jail for threatening my employees, and don't think I won't do it. That was his first message. Listen, I slept with your wife. Deal with it. This happens every day. She is not the first wife I have spent my time with, and she will not be the last. Swallow your pride, take it back, and punish it if necessary. This is what she likes and what she wants, so give it to her. If you don't, maybe I'll keep doing it. Now get your ass back here and drive my truck home, or I'll report you for theft. Besides, you'll have to drive for me for 3 more months to pay for your truck driving school. This was his second message. God, what an asshole. So he was still in Canada. I called his wife to see if I could meet her instead of just rushing to his house like I had done before. She agreed, and I played his messages for her. She had been sick before, but after hearing him, she felt worse. At first I wasn't sure I believed you, but now I do. I'm going to set his ass on fire. May I have a copy of this message? We made a copy for her. What are you going to do with your wife? She asked. Divorce, of course. I just don't know how to approach this. It's simple, she said. Find a good lawyer and hire him. It sounded so simple. I left her house and returned to my parents. They also asked me what I was going to do. I told them the same thing I told Mrs. Bradley. My father, in turn, told me word for word exactly what she told me. They convinced me. So I started looking for a lawyer. Again, I had no idea where to start, so I started with the letters A in the phone book. I got to D before I found my lawyer. David Dennison and I hit it off straight away. His entire family, including himself, were truck drivers until he flipped his car and was paralyzed from the waist down. He graduated from law school in a wheelchair. He was the only member of his family not in the trucking business. But they all knew and respected Ernest T. Bradley. Dennison noted several times Bradley's youth and business acumen. In fact, everyone who knew him respected him. He was famous in society. He sponsored sports teams as well as arts programs and donated to every charity that came his way. Dennison flat refused to believe me when I first told him what I had discovered in Canada. He was on Bradley's side, and I was almost ready to leave and find another lawyer, but I decided to listen to the messages for him. He finally began to believe. Wow, this will shake up the community if it gets out. How do you want to deal with this? As private as possible, or do you want to make a big splash? All I want is to get a divorce as cheap as I can. As far as I understand, this will never make it into the newspapers, but the reason for the divorce will be adultery. If that means it goes all over town, so be it. But there won't be any mental cruelty or lies about irreconcilable differences. She cheated, and it will be recorded. It can be difficult if that message is all you have. Courts these days almost require visual evidence, especially when accusing a man of his stature. Well, let's try it. Fine. We will deliver the documents to her in the next few days. Do you have any idea where she might be? Either at work at the bakery, or at home, or in Canada with him, I guess. Well, of course, we can't submit documents to her in Canada, so we'll try at home or at work. It fits me. You can contact me by mobile or at my parents'. I was tired of living with my parents, so I spent the next few days looking for my own apartment. I found an apartment that wasn't the fanciest or best in town, but it was mine. A week later, Julia was served at work. My father owned a small welding shop. I never had any interest or inclination towards welding, but that started to change. He convinced me to come work for him, just to get me out of my apartment. Both he and my mother thought I spent too much time indoors. I thought about going to work for another transport company, but I wasn't too enthusiastic about it. So I went to a welding shop. My dad had a pickup truck with portable welding equipment, and basically all he did was fix things. Sometimes a client would ask for something special, and my father would prepare it. Julie tried to talk to me several times, but after she was served, everything went through our lawyers. Our first meeting was about a month after she was served. Her lawyer, of course, tried to get the adultery charge thrown out. I categorically refused. Bradley was named in the divorce petition, and Julie desperately didn't want his name to appear anywhere near the divorce suit for adultery. This could ruin his reputation in society. "He doesn't deserve it," she objected. I exploded. "Are you serious? He is a wife-stealing slug and should be told to the public." Julie intervened. "If you had treated your wife better, they wouldn't have been able to steal her." This led to a quarrel between us, which could only be stopped by placing us in separate rooms. After we cooled down and were back in the same room, she again tried to get me to remove his name. "I'm not going to do this, so forget about it. Why are you trying so hard to protect him? Are you planning to marry him? Are you still sleeping with him?" FYI, he and I are still dating, so yes, I'm still sleeping with him. Her lawyer simply laid his head on the table and groaned, and without lifting it, he spoke. "You just admitted to your husband and 2 bailiffs that you committed adultery. This is probably the worst thing you could do." "At this point, I don't care," she said. Then to me, "Answering your other question. Yes, I'm going to marry him, as soon as he gets divorced." "So you think he loves you?" I asked. "Certainly." I put my phone on the table and scrolled through his message to her. "That's not what he meant. He just drove you crazy." I laughed as Mr. Dennison took an envelope from his briefcase and slid it across the table to Julie. Her lawyer intercepted the envelope, opened it, and took out the contents. He read the attached note, then looked through the photos one by one. He gave the package to Julie. She looked at the photos first, then read the note. "Mr. Mann, this may help you with your divorce. The first 5 pictures were taken on the island 3 weeks ago. The woman is his hairdresser's wife. She left her husband to spend the weekend with my husband. The following 6 were made at our house last week. I was out of town with my parents. He picked up this woman at a bar. I have no idea if she's married and I don't care. I don't know her name, and I doubt my husband knows either. She was just another asshole, just like your wife. It was signed Cynthia. All of the photos showed Bradley and the 2 women either in various stages of undress or in various sexual positions. There was no doubt that they had sex." Julie pushed the photographs back across the table, stood up, and left the room. I never saw her again until we met in court. We shared everything. She got half our money, her jewelry, china, silverware, and her clothes. She stayed in our apartment. In society, Bradley very quickly fell out of favor. His reputation was destroyed, and the 3 sports teams he sponsored went out of business. Cynthia received half of all the assets they had, which meant she owned half of the moving company and their home. He only got an island in Canada because she didn't want it. He sent my lawyer a bill for truck driving school, accusing me of leaving my job before fulfilling the terms of our contract. Mr. Dennison immediately sent him a letter asking him to kiss our asses. Cynthia called to tell me to ignore the letter and asked if I wanted to go back to work as an operations manager for a trucking company. I gave in to temptation, but refused her. Over the next year or so, I discovered that if I put my mind to it, I could make quite a beautiful metal bead thanks to my father's patience and his teaching abilities. I also realized that I enjoy doing this. I dated, but never had a long-term, meaningful relationship. I saw Julie once or twice, and we always said hello to each other. Bradley's trucking business was sold, and I never saw Cynthia again. But I did see Bradley occasionally. I recognized him, but I'm sure he wouldn't recognize me. When I worked for him, I was one of hundreds of drivers, and he only saw us occasionally. While learning to weld, I discovered that I enjoyed working with metal, so in addition to fixing things in the shop and using the truck to do on-site repairs, I began making small items such as weather vanes, small custom gate hinges, and mailbox stands. My father and I rarely worked on weekends, but one Sunday afternoon, I found myself working on a rather ornate weather vane. I was having trouble with its proportions, so I stared at it, hoping a solution would magically appear. I didn't hear the door open or close, but I felt someone's presence, so I looked up. It was Julie. None of us said anything. She stood there for a couple of minutes before pulling up a metal stool and sitting down. "Can we talk?" she asked. "I have nothing to tell you." "Fine. Just listen." She leaned forward. "I don't have a good reason to do what I did. You and I, had a good life. We had enough money, a good apartment, and we loved each other. At least that's what I think. So why, out of the blue, did I decide to sleep with Bradley? The answer is both simple and complex. I could try to blame you and say that you were gone too much, because that was one of the lines he fed me, and after a while I believed it. He also said that you treated me wrong when you were at home, and after a while I believed it too. He said that almost every truck driver found someone to sleep with while they were on the road, and after a while I would imagine you having fun with some waitress at a truck stop or a female truck driver. He also said that truck drivers never made enough money to treat their women right, and after a while I became convinced of this. He was, and probably still is, a smarmy son of a bitch, and I was so trusting. This didn't happen overnight. He worked on me for several months. Shirley then started working on me, telling me how well Bradley could treat me if I let him. She told me that she can monitor your trips, so I never have to worry about you finding out. She also told me that Mrs. Bradley told her that she didn't need sex as often as her husband did, so she allowed him to sleep with select women because it made him a better husband for her. She told me that Mrs. Bradley must have approved of the women he slept with and that she only approved of me because she saw me when I came to collect your checks. Now this lie sounds stupid, but it wasn't so then. Now I know it. I sat and listened. When I thought she had calmed down, I spoke. "Why are you telling me all this now?" "I don't know. I don't think I ever wanted to tell you this. At least not the truth. I didn't want you to know how stupid I was. I always thought I'd make up a story where it was all your fault. And I came up with a few jokes, but I could never tell you about any of them. This afternoon, driving past your store, I saw you here and stopped. I had no idea what I was going to say. Just that I was going to say something if you would let me, but what I said turned out to be true. What did you expect to get from this? Just so you know that none of this was your fault. That these were all my own selfish desires and imaginary situations that he created for me. I also wanted you to know that whether you believe it or not, I never stopped loving you. This is where I think you're lying. I don't think you can truly love someone and lie to them or cheat on them. You did both. You even wanted to marry him, if I remember correctly. Are you still sleeping with him? I can't explain it any better than I already have, and I can't make you believe me, so I won't even try. And no, I'm not dating him. I haven't seen each other since that day in the lawyer's office when I saw those photographs. She sat for a few more minutes watching me work. I guess I'd better leave. She stood up. Scott? I looked at her. Is there any way to forgive me enough to give me another chance? I shook my head. You know where the exit is. After she left, I didn't accomplish much other than reaffirm my opinion that my ex-boss was a top-notch asshole, and my ex-wife was dumber than a box of rocks. I wondered what would have happened if I hadn't gone to that island to surprise my boss. Would I still drive a truck and get sloppy seconds? I decided that I would rather make weather vanes and go broke. One day we received a flyer for the Renaissance Festival in the mail. I've never heard of the Renaissance Festival. It contained photographs of people participating in jousting tournaments and knights walking around in armor. There were pictures of sellers of armor, swords, knives, costumes, and everything you associate with the Renaissance. It was supposed to be right down the highway in Maryland. And from this flyer, I learned that Maryland has two sports, jousting and lacrosse. I didn't believe that jousting was an official sport in any state, so I looked it up and found that it was true. I decided to go. I spent the whole day there and spent most of the time looking at the sellers' wares and observing the visitors. There was a lot of money floating around the festival circuit, and I realized I could get my share. Several sword and knife makers, as well as gunsmiths, worked on site. I liked the armor and shields. I returned home, did a lot of research, and developed my first shield and sword. I also looked online for Renaissance Festival schedules. I made 5 shields and 7 swords. I took them to the next closest festival I could find. I learned that there were many of them, and they were all over the country. I got there a day early to talk to some of the salespeople. I met one seller who sold what seemed to me to be the highest quality swords and knives. I offered him a deal. I would keep what I had to see if it would sell, and he would get a commission. He hesitated, but agreed. I was planning to spend the night, but there were no rooms available near the festival. This is a sign of how popular they were, so I went home. I rarely trusted strangers, but I had no way of selling them myself. The seller, Teddy Wyckoff, called me Sunday morning and told me that all my items were sold. He sent me a check. I had a new business. In the following weeks, I did even more festival stuff. Teddy wanted 10 swords and 10 shields for the next festival, which was to take place next week. I managed to prepare 4 of each. Meanwhile, I was still helping my father with his business. We received a call asking us to repair our driveway gate. Looks like my daughter's boyfriend drove through the gate instead of waiting for it to open. I was told that alcohol was involved. I walked out and saw a huge gate on the circular driveway. The house outside the gate was huge. I met the owner, Mr. James Jameson. At first, I started turning down jobs because I thought he was too big for us. This gate was almost 3.5 meters high. I decided to try it. All it would cost us is a little time and metal if I messed it up. I spent a good part of the day trying to figure out what tools I would need, then went back to the store to see what we had that I could use. I found a couple of places that I thought might work, so I went back the next day. I had been working for about 2 hours and had actually made some progress when a woman about my age brought me some iced tea. Her name was Hannah, and she lived there. It was her beau who caused the damage. I had my own snacks, but she came out twice with iced tea and stayed to talk each time. It took 2 days of bending, twisting, straightening, and welding, but I fixed the gate. Hannah was there the second day with drinks and a sense of humor. I enjoyed her company. Around the same time, I became interested in armor. They seemed to be popular at festivals, and I was curious about how to make them. How long will it take? How much will it cost to make them? And finally, will we be able to make a profit from them? I was dating a woman I met in the library while doing research. We met at least twice a week and had sex every time we were together. However, this relationship, like others I had, ended after a few weeks. There was a cinema in the shopping center. I rarely went to the movies, but one Friday night I was so bored that I went. Before the lights went out, Hannah came in with her boyfriend. They sat down right in front of me, and his arm immediately wrapped around hers. Less than 5 minutes after the lights went down and the upcoming movie announcements began, I heard Hannah, "If you touch me there again, I'll cut off your balls." His hand fell on her shoulder. She left in irritation, and her boyfriend begged her to return. I followed them. To her credit, she didn't take shit from him. I wasn't close enough to hear, but they were arguing about something. I decided to intervene, which I had never done before. "Excuse me, Hannah, are you okay?" She looked at me. It took her a couple of seconds to recognize me. "No, that's not true. This asshole has more arms than an octopus, and I'm tired of fighting him off. Could you take me home?" "Certainly." We were heading to my truck when another guy approached us. "Are you okay, Hannah?" he asked. "Now, yes." "Do you want me to take you home?" he asked. She didn't even look at me before saying yes. They headed to his car without even saying goodbye to me, as if I wasn't there at all. I stood and watched them leave. I shook my head and went home. I was at her house a few days later. There were some railings along the walkway between the house and the pool that needed some attention, so Mr. Jameson asked me to come back. Hannah saw me and came over to say hello, but she never mentioned the movie incident. I was a little annoyed at being completely ignored at the movie and wasn't in the mood to chat. She took the hint and left. I returned the next day with spare parts. It was a simple, off-the-shelf railing, so parts were readily available. She was heading towards the pool and stopped to chat. I mostly ignored her. I enjoyed our conversations when I was working on the gate, but after the incident in the theater, not so much. "Are you mad at me?" she asked. "Do you remember what happened at the cinema last week?" I asked. "You mean when I was with the octopus?" "Yes." "What about this? You asked me to take you home. Do you remember this?" "Certainly." "What happened after that?" "Nothing. Jimmy showed up and took me home." "And you didn't see anything wrong with that?" "No." "Was it bad?" "Not if you didn't see anything, I guess. I took a hammer and started hitting the metal just to make noise, thinking she would go away." "It does not make sense." "I think yes. She was losing patience." "I don't understand you." I looked her straight in the eyes. "That's the problem." I started hitting the metal again. She took the hint and left. The rest of the day was spent finishing the railings. My interest in armor increased, and I did a lot of research on how it was made. I made my first piece of armor and was very proud of it. I sent his photo to Teddy to see what he thought. "Stick to shields and swords," he said, laughing. "You are good at it. Armor needs a lot of work before anyone buys it." Just a few days later, I was at a local bar, drinking beer and watching a baseball game, when Hannah sat down next to me. "I'm meeting friends for a drink. Would you like to join us?" she asked. "No, thanks. I feel good where I am." She stood up and started to leave, but hesitated. She looked at me. "Are you ever going to tell me what I did to make you angry?" "If I have to explain to you, then I feel sorry for you. Enjoy your drinks." I had almost finished my beer and was about to leave when she returned. "Oh my God, Scott. I didn't mean to ignore you in the theater. This octopus made me so angry that I didn't know what I was doing. Please accept my apologies." I assumed she said something at her table about our conversation and someone corrected her. "Apologies are accepted." She smiled. "Will you join us now?" She paused. "Please, let's just have a drink. I owe you at least this." I smiled back. "Necessarily. Thank you." They all drank, and the evening turned out to be fun. Two of them, I don't remember their names, reminded Hannah of her manners throughout the evening. I felt sorry for her. The group broke up and we all left. I went out with Ginny. I sat down next to her at the table and asked her about Hannah. She told me that they had been friends for a long time. "Look, Scott, I'm not her best friend, but I'm close. There's something about you that she likes. She's sorry for treating you this way. She told me this." "Damn it. She told the whole table that she told you. You have to give her credit for that. Call her. Do you have her number?" "No. Give me your phone." I did so, and she wrote down Hannah's number in it. "Call her." One morning, the next week, I was working in the store when Hannah walked in. I assumed she got the address from her father. "Did you have fun last time?" "I like it. I like your friends." "That's good, but what about me?" "So, what about you? Do you like me?" I apologized, if you remember. "I remember." "Then why aren't we friends?" she asked. I smiled. "I think we're working on it." An apology does not automatically mean friendship. It simply means that you realize you made a mistake and regret what you did. Whatever you did, that's why you apologize. This person may or may not accept your apology. I accepted it, but that doesn't mean we'll be best friends. It simply means that I acknowledge that you understand what you did and are sorry for it, assuming the apology was sincere. It was sincere. I agree. Fine. Then let's go somewhere for dinner. I laughed. Why not? She asked. It will be a good way to work on developing our friendship. Fine. When? Why not tonight? And so it was. Hannah and I had dinner, and our friendship grew stronger. We dated for 2 months before I saw her naked. But that was just the beginning. Our relationship flourished. And it didn't take long before we wanted to spend all our time together. She would come to the store just to sit and be with me, and we both enjoyed that time together. I could work and she could read. We never had to talk or interact. All we needed was to just be there for each other. One night during bed talk, I learned that she had only been married for a short time. However, she shocked me when she said that Jonah Jameson was not her real father. She and her mother were married for only 7 years. She had an older brother, and their father died. 2 years later, their mother married Jameson. Their father owned a trucking company, and her brother Ernest wanted to take over and run it. He was 6 years older than Hannah, and most people thought he was too young, but Hannah and her mother agreed to let him try. He showed real ability, and the company prospered. I got out of bed, poured us both a drink, and went back to bed. Tell me about your brother, I asked. I've already told you most of it. The important parts, anyway. The bottom line is that the transport company was doing well, so good that he and my ex-daughter-in-law bought an island in Canada. Then some bitch got her teeth into him, and he ended up getting divorced and selling the company. Apparently, this bitch's husband started driving for him and thought they could make some money off of my poor brother. His wife squeezed into the frame and seduced him. They arranged it so that the husband would find his wife and my brother together on their island. My sister-in-law divorced my brother, took half the company, and then they were forced to sell it. What a pair of fucking thieves. I finished my drink in one gulp. How much did they extort from him? I asked. My brother never told me, but they had to get something. Do you know their names? I knew, but I forgot. I decided to tell her what really happened, but I thought that would be the end of our relationship, so I decided to have one last sex first. After we calmed down, I almost talked myself into not telling her who I was because I had never had better sex than what I had just experienced. I knew that once I told her the truth, we would be done. We were at her house, and I was getting ready to go home anyway, so I got dressed. I sat on the edge of her bed, putting on my socks and shoes. The time has come, and I started. Let's go back to the story of your brother's divorce. Was what you told me the official story or his version? He told me, so that was the official version. Why do you ask? Because everything happened completely wrong? What do you mean? So I told her the real story. About halfway through, she jumped out of bed, still naked, and just watched. In the end, I said that the only thing Julie and I achieved was a divorce, not extortion. When I finished, all she said was, "You are lying. Get out." I am not lying. This is true. She threw a pillow at me. You are lying. Get out, and don't come back. With these words, I left. I hated it when it ended like that, but I loved that last sex. Life went on. I had another period of social lull, and I couldn't seem to find a way out of the impasse I was in. One evening, I wanted to splurge, so I had dinner at a very nice restaurant. I finished my main course, raised my napkin to my mouth, and looked around. A few tables away from me sat Hannah and her brother. There was a small cake with candles on their table. I signaled to the waiter that I was ready to receive the bill. He brought it, and I paid. I stood up, walked straight to Hannah's table, and sat down. They both looked at me like I was an alien. Her brother spoke first. Are you sure you're at the right table? He asked, obviously not remembering me. Indeed, and I think you should tell your sister the truth about your divorce. She knows about it. Who the hell are you? But obviously she doesn't know the truth, so you need to tell her the true version. Fuck you. Scott, what are you doing? She almost screamed. Get out of here. As if by magic, the waiter appeared. Are there any problems here? He asked. This guy, Hannah said, pointing at me, sat here uninvited and threatened my brother. I want him to get out of here. Certainly. Sir, I have to ask you to leave. I looked at Bradley first. You're a real slug. Then I looked at Hannah. I don't know why you never talked to his ex-wife, but check at the courthouse and look at my divorce record. Then you will know the truth. Just get out of here, she said. I left, deciding that I would see her for the last time. I worked in my shop on the projects that interested me the most, axes and chainmail. I was too busy to see her anyway. A festival was planned for the following weekend. I took some shields and samples of my axes and chainmail to show Teddy. He got me a vendor pass, so I drove through the entrance. When I got there, he was talking to a young lady dressed in period costume. The costume was a long, flowing dress with a bodice cut so low that it barely covered her nipples. I stood and waited while they talked. He looked in my direction, recognized me, and motioned to me. Diana, this is Scott. Scott. Diana. He spoke to her. Scott is the designer and creator of some of our things, and I understand that he may have some new things. Right, Scott? I laughed. That's what I do. I got some new clothes from my truck. Both he and Diana stood frozen in front of it as if it were a treasure. I couldn't take my eyes off her bodice. Every time she leaned forward, I leaned in with her, hoping to see more, but it was too crowded for me to see better. I spent a lot of time with them and even had dinner with them. Dinner included meat pies and iced tea from another vendor. I wanted to ask about their relationship, but there never seemed to be a good time to ask the question. There were many other people walking around, renewing friendships and contacts from other festivals. At least half the people were dressed in period costumes. Some men imitated sword fights for their own amusement. These fights served as rehearsals for the fights in front of the visitors, which began the next day. I don't remember seeing so many people having so much fun. Teddy had a tent in the area reserved for vendors and reenactors, so I stayed with him for the night. When everything calmed down, I asked him about Diana. She and her sister are the organizers of this particular festival, as well as many others around the country. Everyone is happy about her arrival. We have been friends with her for many years. In fact, if you weren't here today, she would be. Oh, shit. Why didn't you say anything? I'd go to a motel. No, you wouldn't go. Even if I let you, there are no free rooms for 50 kilometers around. When visitors started arriving the next day, the reenactors had even more fun interacting with them, and Diana, as always, was a huge hit, I was told over and over again. I spent the whole weekend with Teddy. Several times I watched his stall while he and Diana went to his tent. I had a lot of time to talk with other sellers and visitors. We sold everything Teddy had in stock, plus what I brought with me. It was a profitable weekend. I decided to attend more festivals. The festival ended on Sunday. I helped Teddy dismantle his tent and pack everything. It was an 8-hour drive home, so he convinced me to stay another night. Their next festival was 18 hours away. They could begin preparing to open on Wednesday. I didn't think I'd have enough time to make the chainmail, but I told him I'd try. Returning home, I immediately went to the workshop and started working. It was late when I started yawning and realized that I was tired. I barely slept over the weekend. The clock showed that it was almost 2 in the morning when I left. It was about 3 when I returned home. Not even 5 minutes had passed when my doorbell rang. I opened the door and Hannah literally fell into my arms. She smelled of alcohol. 2 policemen stood behind her. Are you Scott Man? Yes. Is she your girlfriend? I know her, but she's not my girlfriend. You are sure? She insists that you are her boyfriend, not even close. The last time I saw her, she called me a liar and kicked me out of her house, so I promise you I'm not her boyfriend. Which was not entirely true. The last time I saw her was in a restaurant, but it wouldn't have mattered to them. Fine. Come on, Tommy, let's get her. Tommy was obviously his partner because he stepped forward and took her hand. Where are you taking her? I asked. Spend the night at the station. No, do not do that. I'll take care of her. You are sure? No, but I can't let her spend the night at the station. I left her dressed and laid her on the only bed I had. Mine. I would have slept on the couch, which was better than the air mattress in Teddy's tent, but I would have preferred my own bed. Instead, there lay a snoring, drunk woman inside. I woke up the next morning and went to work. I hadn't heard anything from her all day and fully expected that she would still be sleeping when I got home. I was wrong. She left and the apartment was spotless. I immediately headed to the shower. I looked for a note or something, but there was nothing there. I worked tirelessly, but was never able to finish a single new piece of mail. Teddy came in and took some shields, swords, and axes that I had stashed. We discussed whether we should hire a couple of people to help us, but we both realized that there were few metal craftsmen. We then discussed the possibility of doing some training, and that's what we decided to do. We placed advertisements in the regular newspaper and in the festival newsletter. It was Friday evening, and I was in the workshop working on inventing a machine that would make chainmail faster than I could do it. There were a couple available on the market, but I thought I could make it better. It was late, and I was tired when there was a knock. It was a very sober Hannah. "Thank you for saving me from the police." I stood there and nodded. I tried to clean up after myself. "Everything was okay?" I nodded again. She couldn't think of anything to say, as we both just stood there looking at each other. "Listen, it's been a long day and I need to get some sleep." I pushed past her to the door, closed it, locked it, and headed to my car. "Good night." I was almost getting into the car when I heard it. "You were right. My brother lied. I'm sorry." I simply waved over my shoulder, got into my car, and drove home. The armor fascinated me. After Teddy criticized the first armor I made, I did a lot of research and made another armor that I used as a model for others. They were labor-intensive, time-consuming, and very challenging, but I loved the challenge. I felt ready to debut with him. I took it to the next festival, and Teddy loved it. We could have sold it several times, but we wanted to use it as a sample of my work. People looked at it, commented, and if they wanted to buy something for themselves, we talked about any changes they wanted to make to their order. My festival life was good and profitable. I bought a trailer and transported my instruments and supplies so I could move from festival to festival. I worked on my products. Sometimes I worked at a stand in front of visitors, sometimes in the private supplier area. I was talking to my father one evening between festivals and expressed surprise at how Renaissance metalwork could be such a success. Who knew that so many people were interested in armor and could afford it? These things weren't cheap. Festival season ended, and I started dating a girl I met at our local car dealership. I was thinking about buying a new truck. My dad's welding truck was old, so I thought we'd install some welding equipment on my truck, sell the old one, and I'd maybe buy a newer, bigger one. She was servicing her car while I admired the new truck sitting outside the showroom. We struck up a conversation and ended up exchanging phone numbers. A week later, we had our first date, then the second, and so on. One evening, I took her home, and she invited me in. We had our second drink, and I sat on her sofa. She stood in front of me and began to unbutton her blouse. "Do you have any objections if I make myself more comfortable?" she asked. "No. If you don't mind me watching and enjoying it," I replied. She grinned. "That's the whole point of the action. I undress while you watch, then you undress while I watch. Then we have sex, hoping it won't end too quickly. Looks like you have everything planned out." "Oh, yeah." Her blouse was off and her skirt was about to fall to the floor. I reached for the waistband of her panties, but she pushed my hands away. "Let me do this. Just watch and enjoy. You like to watch a lady undress, don't you?" "I don't know. I've never looked before." She laughed a deep, throaty laugh. "I hope you have better sex than you lie." Her braid flew off and landed on top of her skirt. "You're pretty confident, aren't you?" "Oh, yes," she said. "It's your turn." I started to unbutton my shirt. "Slow down, Tiger. We have the whole night ahead of us. Let me enjoy watching." I slowed down and she licked her lips. I kicked off my shoes and unbuckled my belt. Then he unzipped his trousers. As I began to pull my pants down my legs, she placed her hands on my hands and knelt down, following my pants to the floor. She stopped when she was on her knees. I looked down and saw her hands resting on her hips. She looked up at me. "What's next?" T-shirt or shorts? She asked. What do you prefer? T-shirt. Save the best for last. I took off my T-shirt and threw it on the floor. She picked it up and brought it to her nose. God, I love the smell of men, she said. I left for my home around 3 in the morning. The whole way home I was comparing her to Hannah and the last time she and I had sex and couldn't decide who was better. This relationship lasted a good 4 months before we broke up. My phone reminded me that I'd been ignoring him all evening and there were messages for me. 3 from Hannah. Scott, please call me when you receive this message. I don't care what time it is. Please. I took her word for it. She answered after 2 rings. Hello, Scott. Her voice was a little tipsy. I woke you up? I think I dozed it off. I tried to stay awake waiting for your call. Fine. I called. What's so important? I wanted you to know that my brother lied about his divorce. You were right, and I'm sorry. You already apologized for that. Is there anything else? Yes. There was a pause. Can we see each other again? I miss you. Honestly, there is no way you and I can meet, knowing who your brother is and that he had an affair with my wife. If we were serious about each other, we would inevitably clash with him, and I would always feel uncomfortable. I'm not going to put myself through that test. I could tell she was crying. I knew you were going to say it, but I hoped you wouldn't say it. Goodbye, Scott. Renaissance festivals were in full swing again. I negotiated my passes, bought a tent and some camping gear, and hit the road. I spent most of my time helping Teddy at his stand. When I wasn't doing that, I was working on creating new things to sell. My armor improved significantly during the off-season, and at every festival we sold at least 1 piece of armor. We could have sold more, but it took a hell of a lot of time to make each one. 2 days after we closed one of the festivals, Teddy called and asked if I could work at his booth at the next one. I told him yes. He was close to the festival site, so he brought his trailer with everything I would need. I fully loaded my truck and left my trailer at home. I took his trailer. I worked at 3 festivals in a row and even made several billboards in front of visitors. I was also able to work with my chainmail machine, and by the 3rd festival, I was demonstrating that too. The next festival I was planning to attend was near Philadelphia and would last 11 days. It was one of the largest in the country. They usually lasted from Thursday to Sunday, but this one started on Thursday, continued through the weekend, the next week, and the weekend after. I spent 2 weeks at home working on the material for it, and mainly on the armor. My father became an expert in shields, axes, and swords. I worked late every night. Late one night, my doorbell rang. I opened it, and a very drunk Hannah fell into my arms. Is this your girlfriend? Asked one of the 2 policemen who were with her. If it keeps her off camera tonight, I guess so. I half-carried, half-dragged her to my bedroom and just threw her on the bed. I showered, shaved, put on pajamas, and took my clothes for the next day in case she repeated her behavior and puked all over. The next morning I looked in on Hannah, who was still sleeping. I was trying to decide whether to stay and try to talk to her or just forget about it. I went to work. That evening when I returned home, the house was perfect again. She even cleaned my kitchen. In the bathroom, my toothbrush and toothpaste weren't where they usually were, so I put them where they were supposed to be. The toothbrush was wet, as was the washcloth on the sink. I took the enchilada out of the freezer and put it in the microwave. I had dinner, but never tried it. The next morning, I left for a festival in Philadelphia. I took with me all the material that I had for shields and chainmail. I planned to do a lot of demonstrations. The first day was amazing, and things got even better from there. On the first Sunday, a crowd of spectators watched me almost all day. Teddy and I were both exhausted when the festival closed for the day. Evenings in the vendor area have always been the hub of the party scene. There they cooked food, played music, drank alcohol, rehearsed sword fights, repaired or tried on armor, looked after horses, and had sex. It wasn't unusual to walk past a tent and hear the sounds of sex, or to walk past a camper or camper van and watch it rock. I sat outside my tent after things had calmed down and thought how nice it would be if I had someone in my tent to snuggle with. Hannah was probably free, but I just couldn't bring myself to call her. Monday's crowds were hardly crowded, but foot traffic was steady. No attendance records were broken that day. It was the middle of the day, and I was demonstrating how tedious it is to assemble chainmail. I looked up and saw Hannah watching me. I continued my demonstration and asked those who were watching me to ask questions. There were none, and people simply dispersed. Hannah was standing there. "Do you like doing this?" she asked. "Yes, I like it," I replied. "You're doing well." She walked away and disappeared into the crowd. I never saw her until the end of the show. My parents arrived on Wednesday and brought more shields and axes. I showed them around, and they didn't seem happy with what I was doing. I showed them where the vendors were staying, and especially my mother, who hated setting up my tent. The rest of the week and weekend went very well. Both Teddy and I were pleased. When I returned home, I took the day off. When I went to the store, my father was working on chainmail for me. I started telling him about my plans for a larger motorhome and trailer. The door opened and Hannah entered. "This festival was fun. A few of my friends and I are going to the next one, which is not far from here," she said. "We even thought about going in armor." "It should be fun," I answered evasively. "Will you be there?" "Probably." My father and I continued to work and did not look at her. "Can I go with you?" "Not very practical, because I will be there from Wednesday to Sunday." "Everything is fine. We can get a motel room." "Hardly. They sell out of everything months in advance." "Where do you sleep?" "In a tent." "Sounds funny. Maybe we could share." "This is a small tent. Little ones can be funny." My father looked at me, grinned, and left. "Look," she said, "you will never allow yourself to forget that my brother slept with your wife, which means that you and I will never have a long-term relationship." She looked around to see where my father was. "But that doesn't mean we can't be fuck buddies, right? We enjoy sex with each other, don't we?" I agreed. "So why not use each other? You can date whoever you want, but if you don't have sex, I can fix it. How does this sound?" I looked at her. "You're the best thing I've ever had. I've said it once, and I'll say it again. But the thought of sharing leaves me cold. I can't stand the thought of having sex with you only to have you leave for another man, even if you haven't had sex with him. We both need to find a relationship and respect it." She came close to me, reached out, touched my face, and kissed me. "You do not understand. I already have a relationship. If you want to date someone, anyone, go ahead. But know that I will always be available for anything you want, anytime you want it. I don't need anyone else. I love you, and I fully intend to respect this relationship." She kissed me again and left. My father must have been watching as she left. "What are you going to do with her?" I was still looking at the door through which she had just left. "I have no idea, Dad. What do you suggest?" "Either get used to the fact that her brother slept with your ex-wife and accept the possibility that she won't go anywhere, or leave town and keep a low profile. Perhaps now is the time to do what your mother and I talked about." "What is this?" "We'll talk about this when we get home." We were sitting at the dinner table when he told my mother about Hannah. "So I thought maybe it was time to give Scott the gift we were talking about." "I think you might be right," she said. "What are you two talking about?" "I don't like the idea of you sleeping in a tent," my mother said. "We're going to buy you a motorhome," my father said. I knew arguing with them wouldn't stop them. Plus, I thought it was a good idea. It took a week to find what I wanted. I didn't need driving lessons for this, since I had a Class A CDL, so I just hugged them both, thanked them, and bought a trailer to pull it behind me. I set up the trailer so that I could work in it if necessary. I also connected power from the van to the trailer. It was a great setup. I focused on armor while my father made shields, swords, and axes. We both really enjoyed doing this type of work. Teddy got jealous when he saw my trailer and wanted to know if I had christened it yet. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Sex? Has anyone already had sex in it?" "No." He grinned. "Do you mind if Diana and I—" I laughed. "Help yourself." He sent her a message, and she was there in 10 minutes. He grabbed her hand and they started walking. They held hands and laughed when they returned. "We want you to be the first to know," he said. "Diana and I are going to get married." She hugged me. "It was your van that drove him crazy," she said. "Thank you. I didn't see much of any of them that weekend, but my van smelled like perfume and stuff. I was home for a week and Hannah saw the van and stopped. I had been going through a long dry spell and knew I could get her into bed, so I showed her around and she was suitably impressed. "This is much more than a tent," she said. "Yes, that's true," I said. "This is a double bed, isn't it?" she asked. "Yes. And a big closet." "Of course I have bum." "Looks like this shower room can fit too." "They probably can." We were in the living room of the van, and she came up to me. "Has he already been christened?" "What do you mean?" I asked, even knowing what she meant. "Sex. Has anyone already had sex in it?" I lied. "No, it's completely new." "Well," she almost whispered, "we can do it now or this weekend. We were in my parents' yard, so the now she was talking about was impossible." "What do you mean this weekend?" I asked. "We will have enough time after the festival closes in the evening. We can do it then." "Sorry, but this is in Southern Virginia. Even if I said yes, it's too long a trip for you." "You're right," she said. "So I'll just go with you." "Didn't you hear what I just said?" She started tugging at my shirt, pulling me towards her. "Scott, you admitted that I'm the best ass you've ever had, and you're the best I've ever had. Besides, I'm in love with you, and I know you like me more than a little. I think we should just have sex whenever we can. Also, I have a dress that I think would be perfect for the festival. Everyone will love it." She kissed me, softly and tenderly, as if she was in love with me. "Especially you." "I'm leaving here on Tuesday at 5 in the morning." "I won't wait for you," I said meekly. She kissed me again. "You don't have to." She was right. She unpacked her clothes, stocked the kitchen, and by midnight, Monday was in bed in the van. Right after I got behind the wheel on Tuesday morning, she came and sat in the passenger seat, wearing only a dressing gown. I know because she kept glaring at me every time I looked her way. She met Diana, and they were both wearing low-cut dresses that showed their boobs. I couldn't wait for the work day to end. At the end of the day, Teddy and I closed the booth. Diana and Hannah were cooking dinner in the van when we got there. I've never tried anything Hannah made, but it was delicious. After Teddy and Diana left, Hannah asked me if I wanted to take a shower with her. There was room for 2 in the shower, and then we made it to the bed. That night was the first of many nights and days where we enjoyed each other in that van. This was also 3 years ago. At first, her family tried to convince her that the only reason I allowed her to travel with me was to get even with her brother because he convinced them that Julie and I were to blame for his divorce, not him. Obviously, none of them had been in court to see the truth, and they, like Hannah, believed him. Hannah provided them with copies of my divorce petition and her ex-sister-in-law's petition. He stayed in town and was responsible for a couple more divorces before deciding that the other side of the country would be better for his health. Hannah has several new dresses that she wears to festivals. They don't highlight her big belly as much. She didn't say she wanted to be a wife before she became a mother, but I know it's on her mind. Me too. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one.